Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really fun video idea for you guys. So typically when I purchase an eyeshadow palette, it's because I love the majority of the palette. I think the colors are beautiful. I hope that everything will work well for me. But once I get the chance to try it out, there are usually just like one or two shades that I would love to switch out, some small changes that I would love to make to the palette to make it even better. So in today's video, I have 5 different palettes that I love. I think that these palettes are so good, but I feel like I could make them a little bit better if I was to switch out just a couple of the shades. Obviously, all of this is hypothetical, and what's nice about eyeshadow palettes is that you can use one and then you can reach into another one, so I love to do that. But if I could kind of transform these palettes a little bit to create my perfect palette, this is what I would do. I thought that this was such a fun video idea. Today's video is actually a collab, and Mandy Lee is the one that came up with this idea. I'm doing this video with Mandy Lee and Jen Phelps, and I love both of their channels. I'm going to link them in the description box below in case you guys aren't already subscribed to them. Mandy and Jen both film a lot of fun eyeshadow palette related videos, and I love watching eyeshadow palette related videos. I love filming them. They are my favorite videos here on YouTube, so if you guys like my videos, I think you'll like theirs as well. I feel like we have very similar styles when it comes to reviews and video ideas, and I just think both of them kind of remind me of old school YouTube in the best way possible. They chat about makeup, they review products, and everything is just relaxed and fun and chill, and I love watching their videos when I'm getting ready in the morning. I think I found Mandy through one of her videos where she did 7 looks with one palette. She has a couple of those videos on her channel, and they are so helpful. If you get a new palette, sometimes you don't know where to start, so I love when she films those, but she has a lot of other great videos, including drugstore reviews. She touches on high-end as well. She kind of does like a monthly theme sometimes. So this month, during the month of August, is like a month of nothing new. So she's focusing on older products and things she already owns, and I just love her channel. Jen's channel is really great as well. I actually talked about her when I did the drugstore makeup tag because she created that. Jen is so good at reviews and reviewing collections as they come out, so it's extremely helpful if you're trying to decide whether or not to try something because she is really on top of her reviews. She's honest and trustworthy, and I know that I can take her opinions into account when I'm thinking about buying something. I also recommend checking out her Instagram because she does palette swatches and comparisons that are very, very helpful. But if you guys aren't subscribed to Mandy or Jen, I think you will enjoy their channels so much. They are what is good about YouTube. I love watching them. I think they're just genuinely sweet, kind people. They're gorgeous and engaging, and I think you guys will love their channels as well. So I'll link them in the description box below. But let's jump into it, and I'll kick it off with the palette that I would make the most changes to. Okay, I moved over because I'm going to put a picture of the palette on the screen as I talk about it, and then as I switch out the shades, I'll give you guys an idea of what the palette will look like. I just used PicMonkey. I am not a photo editing expert, so it might look a little bit off, but hopefully it will give you an idea. So let's kick it off with the Urban Decay Naked Ultraviolet palette. So this palette totally took me by surprise. When I saw the initial photos of this palette, I felt like it was kind of random. It almost looked like 2 separate palettes, and based on the packaging and the name, I think that I, as well as some other people, expected to see a little bit more of a purple themed palette. After using it, I do love it, and I think that I've been able to create some really interesting looks using the warm tones and the purples. I actually did a whole review on it, so if you want to check it out, I did 3 different looks. I'll link it in the description box below, but for the sake of this video, I kind of wanted to take out some of those warm tones and replace them with some purples. I think if I was being really picky, you know, the initial shade Trippin', which is the highlight shade, is a little bit warmer than I would like. I'd probably make it slightly icier, but we'll leave it in there for, you know, the sake of this video. So the main change that I would make to this palette would just be to add in some deep, rich matte purples. This palette has a lot of shimmer shadows in it, but it doesn't have a lot of mattes, especially a lot of matte purples. There's one matte in there, or like matte purple in the shade Optimize, which is a really light lavender. That one looks great as a crease shade or a transition shade, but that's pretty much it. If I want to deepen up the outer corner or the crease, I have to go in with a satin or a shimmer, which is obviously a possibility, but I just feel like these satins and shimmers don't build as well as matte shadows. So I pulled out the ColourPop Lilac You A Lot palette. This one is really gorgeous. It has some purples, some like lighter pastel shades, but it has two deep, rich purples right in the bottom outer corner. The shade Iffy and the shade Filtered are so nice for this palette because you can really build up the outer corner or the crease and kind of take it from a light pastel look to something a little bit deeper and intense. So I actually took those two shades and put them inside the Urban Decay Naked palette. I think that they would go so well with a lot of the shimmers in here. So I also found the most gorgeous shadow in my ColourPop It's My Pleasure palette. This one is called Earth Shine, and it's the most beautiful pinky purple duochrome, and it would look amazing layered on top of any of these shimmer shadows. There is a really pretty transforming shade in the Urban Decay Naked palette called Lucid. It kind of looks blue in the photos, but once you actually apply it to the eyes, I mean, it does give you like a hint of green, a hint of blue. It's just a gorgeous shadow to layer on top. But I do think that, you know, Earth Shine from the It's My Pleasure palette is even better because it kind of has like a pinky purple shift. So it goes so beautifully on top of any pink or purple shadow. So I think adding that in would really top off the palette and make it perfect. Again, this is an Urban Decay Naked palette, so I can see why they wouldn't want something so vibrant and so colorful, because typically I feel like the Naked palettes make color just easy to wear, a little bit more approachable, so typically they do throw in some of those lighter neutral tones. But if I could switch out some of the shades just to create, in my mind, like a perfect purple palette, I think that that would be amazing. The next palette I want to talk about is the Tribe palette from Juvia's Place. So this is a really gorgeous palette. It definitely is a little bit more of a colorful palette. There are greens and oranges, a couple of neutrals. What I love about this palette is that it has the most gorgeous, intense duochromes, and they look amazing on the eyes. There are just two changes that I would make to this palette to make it something that I would reach for even more. So first of all, there's a really pretty green in this palette, and as gorgeous as it is, it's not something that I personally reach for super often, especially when I'm using this palette. When I'm doing a green look, I'm usually going for like the bottom right-hand corner or using like that beautiful metallic all over the lid. I rarely reach for the lime green or like the medium toned green, to be honest with you. But if I could switch out that medium toned green for like a deep navy, I think that would be so perfect. The Juvia's Place Magic Mini palette actually has a really gorgeous navy in it. But I think navy combined with like that gorgeous green blue metallic and that forest green would be amazing. And it would just create like the perfect go-to smoky eye. So I think I would leave the orange tones because I do think they are fun. You can kind of use them on their own or mix them with like the brown and the bronze shade. But I also think I would switch out that top lime green. It's just not a shade that I reach for very often, if at all. So I think, you know, looking at the Magic Mini by Juvia's Place, I would actually take that shade Nubia, which is a really beautiful like greenish gold in the top left-hand corner, and switch that out and place it in the Juvia's Place Tribe palette. So instead of a matte lime green, I'd have a little bit more of like a metallic greenish gold, and that would go so beautifully with a lot of the shades in here. I honestly can see myself creating so many different looks, and because I do have the Magic Mini palette, I can totally reach into those two shades and use them alongside of this palette. But I just think those two shades combined with this palette would be such a beautiful palette and such a good palette for fall. Like I said, the nice part about eyeshadow palettes is that you don't just have to use one palette. You can kind of reach into different palettes to create looks. But if I was kind of tweaking this one and creating my perfect palette, that's what I would do. Let's talk about a little bit of a newer palette. This one is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I have been enjoying this so much. I think that I got this one back in July, but I was really focusing on drugstore makeup for the majority of July. So I don't think I've really done anything with this on my channel. So I definitely plan on doing something because to me, this is the perfect bronzy palette. When I saw the initial photos online, I didn't think that it was anything groundbreaking because I feel like this palette looks a lot prettier in person. There's something about like the metallics and the duochromes that just look prettier in the pan when you're looking at it in person and when you're applying them on the eyes. So the photo that I'm going to put on the screen just doesn't even do this palette justice, to be honest with you guys. So after using it for a few weeks, there are just two small changes that I would make to this palette to create like my perfect staple go-to palette. For a long time, I thought about buying the Natasha Denona Biba palette because that one is full of like staple neutrals, and I thought that I would get so much use out of it. But usually when I wear like just staple neutral looks, I kind of go for a little bit more of a bronzy look, and the shades in here really have been perfect for me. And I think when you see the shades that I'm going to switch out, it's going to look a lot more boring overall, but I think it would be a lot more useful day to day. So when you look at the palette, there is a shade called Deep Dive, which kind of looks black in the pan, especially when you're looking in the photos. But once you swatch it on the hand or even on the eyes, it has a little bit of like a purpley berry undertone to it. So it's not a true black, which I do think is nice. It can come in handy. But for me, because this has a little bit of like a satin sheen, it just doesn't build as well as I would like it to. I'm not someone who thinks that every palette has to have like a matte black and then like a matte cream shadow as well. But a lot of the shades in here are like in the light to medium range. So there aren't a lot of shades that kind of create a deeper, more intense smoky look. And I feel like because a lot of them are like shimmery bronzes and light browns, you just need something to really deepen things up quite a bit. So just kind of switching out this one for even a different finish would be amazing. The other shade that I would switch out is something that I think is so interesting and so much fun. This shade Rhodium is gorgeous, and I think that it is so beautiful on the eyes. I really like using it because it has, again, kind of like a purpley undertone. It's like a gray steel with a little bit of purple to it, and it looks amazing on the eyes. The only thing about this shade is that I don't feel like it really goes with the palette, at least not the looks that I typically create when I'm using this palette. So I haven't been able to get as much use out of it as I would have liked to. And again, something that I feel like this palette is missing is just like an intense, deep, warm brown. So I feel like adding in that matte black and then also a really intense matte rich brown would be perfect. So again, I already edited this photo. I'll put it on the screen for you guys. I took the brown from the Biba palette and just darkened it up just a little bit. So when you look at the original palette next to my updated palette, it might look a lot more boring. Honestly, I can totally see that. In person, I don't think it would because this palette is just so stunning in person. But when I use this, I feel like I get a little bit more of just like a regular bronzy eye. And that's something that a lot of people like to wear day to day. So I feel like having those two practical shadows, even though they might look a little bit more boring, would be so useful in this palette just because it would help me create even more, staple bronzy looks. So this next change is going to be a very, very small change, but I do feel like it would contribute to a better palette overall. This one is the Melt Cosmetics Smoke Sessions palette. I think that this is just such a beautiful palette, and I kind of went back and forth on this one for so long because I just wasn't sure that I needed it. I kind of heard mixed reviews on the actual quality, and I will say that every shadow in here performs flawlessly with the exception of the shade Black Widow. Black Widow is such a gorgeous color, but I feel like as soon as I got this palette, it kind of had like hard pan and the shadow just wasn't very rich or smooth or pigmented. And I even tried to like scrape off the top layer and see if that would work, but no matter what I do, it just doesn't work very well. One of you guys, or actually a few of you guys, said that you actually repressed that shadow and it performed a lot better. So I might actually try that, but I would just make one small change and I would change up the formula for this shadow. I have this ColourPop Super Shock shadow in the shade Hammered, which would be perfect in here because the quality is amazing. This one has a little bit of like sparkle to it as well. The base is very, very similar, but this one looks and performs so much better. So I would definitely replace this with like an updated, better formula. But other than that, I love the way that this palette is laid out. I like how the first half of the palette has like those olive greens, that gold. I think that's a perfect addition. And then the second half of the palette has some like bluish minty tones as well. And I just love using it. It does have 6 shimmers and 2 matte shadows, but I feel like the matte shadows work with the shimmers in here. Actually, if I could make one more change to this palette, I would keep it how it is, other than replacing the shade Black Widow with a better formula, but I would add in like a medium cool toned taupe transition color. I don't feel like this palette has to have a transition color. Like sometimes I'll just take some of the matte shadows and work them into the crease and kind of blend them out. But I do think because these shadows are so intense and so rich, sometimes it is nice to have a lighter, cooler toned color to kind of blend out the edges and just soften things up a little bit. So that might be a nice addition, but other than that, I do love the colors in here. I think they are so pretty. Okay, so finishing up with my last palette, I definitely wanted to do a ColourPop palette. I love my ColourPop palettes so much, but typically when it comes to this one and like a couple of other ones, I always say if I could just switch out 1 or 2 shades, they would be perfect. So the Baby Got Peach palette is one of my go-to palettes during the summertime. The first thing that I would do to this palette is to take out that pressed glitter shadow. I personally don't love when they include pressed glitters, but this shade more than others is super chunky and intense, and I just don't ever reach for that one. So I would completely remove the shade Hungry Ghost and replace it with a Super Shock shadow. I personally think the ColourPop Super Shock shadow in the shade Amaze would be the perfect addition to this palette. It does have a little bit of a peachy undertone to it, so it does go with the theme, but it also has a ton of sparkle, so I think it looks amazing on the eyes. I've hit pan on mine, I use it all the time, so I think just putting that in the palette would be so perfect. The only other thing that I would do to this palette is darken up the darkest shade in here. The shade Half Baked is really pretty and I do like using it, but when I use this palette, I really only get like a light to medium look, which is nice for day to day because it kind of stops me from going too intense on the eyes, but I do feel like having like a deeper warm brown in here would be really nice and it would complement the palette as a whole. There's actually a shade in the Orange You Glad palette that I think would work perfectly in here. That shade is called You Peel Me. So I'll put a picture for you guys on the screen. I would just switch them out and create something just a little bit deeper because I do feel like it would come in handy for, you know, some other looks that you might want to create using this palette if you don't want to go super light or super natural. But other than that, I love this palette. I think it is so much fun for the summertime. I love the warm tones. There's a perfect ratio between mattes and shimmers, and as a whole, I do really enjoy it. I would just switch those out to create my perfect peach palette. Okay guys, that is the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun filming today's video. I think this will actually inspire me to kind of look at some of my other palettes to see what I can create using multiple palettes. I typically do that, but I think, you know, taking the time to sit down and kind of pull them out and look at different color combinations is so much fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to check out Mandy's channel and Jen's channel. I'll link them in the description box below, but I hope you guys have a great day and I'll see you very soon with a new video. Bye.